Thank you for joining us for another dynamic conversation here at the Allentown Art Museum. As many of you know, earlier this year in April, we debuted the Tiffany Memorial windows in the Crest Gallery right here. This project was nearly 10 years in the making, so as you can imagine, we're incredibly proud to offer a home for these masterpieces to be appreciated for generations to come. Our program today is the culmination of a season-long series highlighting this landmark acquisition. We're honored to welcome Dr. Liz McGoey of the Art Institute of Chicago and Jennifer Perry-Thalheimer from the Charles Hosmer Morse Museum of American Art, alongside our very own Elaine Mihalakis. Through their unique institutional lenses, they will discuss the considerations around acquiring and installing Tiffany windows. They'll offer rare insights into the processes of preserving and interpreting these iconic works. Before we dive into the program, I'd like to take a few minutes to recognize some of our generous sponsors. First and foremost, we have to thank our 220 Tiffany campaign donors. We wouldn't be here today without your support. We would also like to thank our sponsors who make free admission for all possible here at the Allentown Art Museum. We're especially thankful to the Century Fund for their esteemed legacy gift, lead supporters from the Lehigh Valley Health Network, now part of Jefferson Health, and City Center Group, along with JB and Kathleen Riley. We would also like to thank the County of Lehigh for their in-kind support for event parking today. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Elaine Mihalakis. Elaine Mihalakis is the Vice President of Curatorial Affairs here at the Allentown Art Museum. She oversees a dynamic exhibition program and a collection of more than 20,000 objects. Her recent projects include the acquisition and presentation of a pair of Tiffany Studio landscape memorial windows, the reimagining of the museum's American galleries, and the exploration of a painting reattributed to Rembrandt. Her publications include Color and Complexity, 30 Years at Durham Press, and American Identities, 20th Century Prints from the Nancy Gray Sherrill Class of 1954 collection. Mihalakis previously worked at the Davis Museum at Wellesley College and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She completed her graduate work at the School of Art Institute of Chicago. Please join me in welcoming Elaine Mihalakis.
Thank you so much, Abby, for organizing today's program. And Jennifer and Liz, thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to hearing you. And thank you to all of you for being here with us today. In 2016, I first saw these incredible Tiffany windows in the United Presbyterian Church in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. It was late autumn and late afternoon, and I was struck by how the light was filtering through the opalescent glass, creating kind of its own luminescent sunset. On the right, you can see a photo that I took that day. And on the left, I'm showing you the church interior with the Thompson Memorial window from 1913, second from the right, and the Dare Memorial window from 1919 at far right, both created by Tiffany Studios under the artistic direction of Louis Comfort Tiffany and likely designed by Agnes Northrup. While I was immediately struck by the luminous windows, we were not sure at that point what would be possible. The museum had been introduced to the church and its windows by a longtime museum supporter who was also an elected official of the Lehigh Presbytery. The church needed funds to replace their coal-based heating system, and they had contemplated selling one or more of their windows. Though the decision was a difficult one, the thought of their going to the nearby Allentown Art Museum eased it. Church member Al Natz has described it as sharing the windows, as many more people are now able to see these incredible windows. In addition, the sale of the windows allowed the church to continue and to expand their social programs in the community. So in late 2017, the museum entered into an agreement with the church to purchase the windows, and at that point we began several years of fundraising, as well as figuring the logistics of how to present the windows in the museum's existing building. In October of 2024, nearly 8 years since I had first seen the windows, they were carefully removed from the church by conservator Diane Rousseau and Northeast Stained Glass. The windows had originally been made in 6 sections to keep the weight of each section low enough for 2 people to handle, which facilitated their removal. As part of our agreement with the church, we produced translucent vinyl reproductions of the windows to take their place. So here you can see museum staff installing the reproductive scrim, and on the right, the reproductions along with an actual stained glass window at the right. The windows were in relatively good condition for their age, but required some attention, so we sent them to the studio of conservator Diane Rousseau. She evaluated and treated the windows, cleaning not only the back and front surfaces, but where necessary, cleaning between the layers of glass, as you can see here. She came up with an ingenious method of injecting an alcohol solution and then using a brass tool to wick up the dirt without dismantling the windows. Rousseau also filled holes in the glass with an epoxy that she carefully mixed to match the swirling colors. And she removed 19 cover leads that had been applied by previous restorers to stabilize cracks in the glass, since those additional lines disrupted the composition. Then she repaired the cracks with a nearly invisible, specially tinted adhesive. Once the conservation was complete, the windows were shipped to the museum in March for installation. Prior to their arrival, we had planned and prepared a space for the windows as part of our Crest Gallery renovations. And so this included a room behind the windows for lighting and ventilation. So what you're looking at here is this bump out and then area for the lighting. One of the challenges that we had with these windows was their height. We didn't have a location that we could install them that had high enough ceilings. So we consulted with experts regarding the possible separation of the dedication panels, which were distinct sections of the windows. We felt it was very important to show those panels since they feature the memorial inscriptions, scriptural quotes that relate to the landscapes, and the Tiffany Studios mark. So we decided to install the dedication panels alongside the windows rather than below them in our gallery. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that struck me when I first saw the windows was how enlivened they were by natural light. And each window represents a transitory moment in time. So in their original setting, they were really transformed by natural light, responsive to season, weather, and time of day. So we felt it was crucial that we find a way to offer a similar experience for our visitors, seeing the windows in their new home at the museum. We commissioned a uniquely designed lighting system that is akin to theater lighting. It incorporates 144 LED lights per window, and these are fully programmable in terms of color, warmth, and intensity, and they can be combined and mapped to sensitive effect. So you can see those light bars on the slide on the left and the various colors that they can emit. And then on the right, you're seeing another innovation of the system, which is this kind of semicircular light bounce that sits behind the lights and the windows. So the lights are actually directed at this reflective material, and then they bounce off of that and then through the windows. So this allows the light to combine and mix before it hits the windows. And we believe this is a new innovation in terms of displaying Tiffany windows in a museum setting. Here you're seeing the installation of the windows, each section going in one by one after the lighting equipment was installed. And then these are the vertical arrays of LED bars installed in the space behind the windows, pointed away from the windows and at the reflective material. We decided to program a condensed sunset and sunrise sequence with time in between to allow visitors to view the windows in reflected light to better see the different types of glass and understand the making of the windows. We also chose a paint that is a very dark blue so that the surrounding area is very dark and the windows would be better highlighted against this receding darkness. We're very privileged to see the windows as they are shown here at the museum, not high above us as they would have been at the church, but at a level that allows us to really appreciate their beauty. When we first presented these windows at our museum, we installed a special exhibition from the Neustadt collection of Tiffany glass, Tiffany's Gardens in Glass, in the gallery. And this was really the perfect complement as it explored Louis C. Tiffany's appreciation of nature as translated into lush botanical lamps and windows. We now display our Tiffany windows in a setting of richly colored and lavishly decorated Renaissance and Baroque artworks. Under the heading of Art for Church and Home, we explore the parallels between 15th and 16th century paintings and the 20th century Tiffany Studios windows as ecclesiastical commissions tapping into spiritual needs. At the Allentown Art Museum, we are honored to be able to present and share these important Tiffany windows for generations to come, and I hope you'll have some time to spend in the gallery with the windows after our talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Elaine. I'm excited to present our next speaker, Liz McGoey. Liz McGoey is the Ann S. and Samuel M. Menkoff Curator of Arts of the Americas at the Art Institute of Chicago, where she focuses on American decorative art and design. She completed a BA in art history at the University of Wisconsin and her MA and PhD in the history of art at Indiana University. She has held fellowships at the New York Public Library, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, Renwick Gallery, and the Winterthur Institute at Winterthur Museum, Garden, and Library. Liz's projects include photography and folk art, looking for America in the 1930s in 2019, Reflections, David Drake's Storage Jar in 2022, and Landscape and Light, the Tiffany Windows at the Art Institute. Liz also edited and co-authored Silver in the Art Institute of Chicago in 2017 and Perspectives on Place in 2023. Currently, she is serving as the executive editor of Panorama, the journal of the Association of Historians of American Art, developing an exhibition and scholarly catalog on Marguerite Zorak, and collaborating on a major reinstallation of the AIC's Arts of the Americas collection. Please join me in welcoming Liz McGoey to the podium.
Thank you so much. I understand. Can I talk with this here? No? I'll hold it. I'm fine with that. Tall people getting up with the windows. It's okay, I can just hold it. I just want to thank my generous colleagues here at the Allentown Art Museum, Max for the incredible work of your team, Elaine for your vision with the windows, which I got to see this morning. It's so extraordinary, and Abby for all of your support here. It is wonderful to be part of the collegial and collaborative group of people who love and steward Tiffany glass, and Jennifer, really glad to share a panel with you as well. And so jumping into the project that I can share with you today, I'm really pleased to talk about the related work that we've done at the Art Institute around the Hartwell Memorial window. Two things at once. I can do it. The window stands 26 feet high by 18 feet wide, And it was originally commissioned and installed for the Central Baptist Church in Providence, Rhode Island, now the Community Church of Providence. And in many ways parallels a lot of the thinking and thought around Allentown's project here, because again, these were religious windows in that space. The congregation reached out and we worked toward this acquisition at the museum. The windows were commissioned by Mary Hartwell at Wright in honor of her husband Frederick Hartwell. Both of them had been very active with the Central Baptist Church in Providence, Rhode Island. Frederick had passed before the construction of the new building, and Mary commissioned these in honor of her husband, recognizing the important place that he had in this congregation. The landscape is a known place, which is rare for Tiffany windows, and in this case what's wonderful is we know that through the family's oral history that they asked that it was a scene of New Hampshire. So New Hampshire in Providence, now in Chicago. You can see the American landscape broadly. But this was a place that had such deep meaning for the family. These are photographs of Mary Hartwell at that family home in New Hampshire. And one of the great joys of the project has been to get to know the descendants of the Hartwells and to know that this is a home that's still in the family. And for them to really embrace the idea that their great-great-grandmother's legacy is now honored in that original site, but now at the Art Institute, has been really special. It makes perfect sense that Mary Hartwell would turn this commission to Tiffany Studios as one of the foremost producers of art glass in the country, and a firm that was at the forefront of technical brilliance. I'm showing here other works in the Art Institute's collection by Tiffany. And at the heart of the design of the Hartwell Memorial window is Agnes Northrup, who is central to our story as it is to yours. Northrup was the leading landscape window designer at Tiffany Studios. Being able to tell her story is incredible. This is a woman that had a lot of agency and creative agency within the studios, working with Louis Comfort Tiffany for over 5 decades. And she, oversaw various departments, but then turned really to these one-of-a-kind commissions in her career. Here I'm showing you the Hartwell Memorial window in its original setting in Providence. And when we were approached by the church in 2017 about acquiring the window, it was not something that I was familiar with. What was fascinating about this, the more I learned, is that it had been referenced in various literature but never illustrated in any of the secondary publications. This is not something that was familiar to many. And I think part of that story is certainly that it was just so big. These are hard windows to photograph. And its scale is really commanding. And I think you can get even more of a sense of this looking here at its installation in Providence. So in the case of this acquisition, the congregation had reached out to museums, knowing that they wanted this window to stay a holistic composition, and it was really part of their mission to make sure that this stayed on public view. And so there's a photo of some of the leaders of the congregation at left, but I think you can also see here the context of the building. And there's a lot of these shared concerns about how the care of the building was difficult, the goals of the congregation, and how they were seeing themselves moving forward and wanted to be good stewards of this extraordinary work of art, which was, of course, very meaningful to the Art Institute as we started to think about its place within our collection. The complexity of this window I can't understate. As I said, it's 26 feet high by 18 feet wide, and it's comprised of 48 individual panels. And then each of those panels, of course, have multiple layers. And you can kind of see a map of these panels at right. And the glass itself is dazzling. I'm showing some details which you can go find these details in your windows as well. That's what's really wonderful about understanding the wonderful glass formulas and effects that Tiffany Studios achieved. So at left, the glass that looks like foliage, where it's these shards of glass rolled in between other brilliant colors. At right, this spotted glass that ends up giving this effect of like dappled sunlight. At left, streaky glass that was often used for water or the kind of background scenes. And at right here, some of the really tactile acid-etched glass elements where they really were able to achieve a lot of these dimensional effects that make it seem so brilliant and like something you want to reach out and touch. I also love showing the backs of the windows, which, Elaine, you had some photographs of these, because trying to describe to people the fact that each panel is a jigsaw puzzle in front of a jigsaw puzzle in front of a jigsaw puzzle. When the lights are turned off, which you have the experience here, it looks wildly different than what it looks like through transmitted light. And same with the back of the window. I mean, this is where I call it like the topographical map. You really see the layering and the depth and how this was achieved. Bringing the window to the museum involved extracting it from the church. And here, we really knew that this was going to be a feat. So you can see here 5 levels of scaffolding. Here's me kind of climbing up to one of those levels, seeing the glass up close and personal for the first time. And this was just the start of extraction at the church. This is a curatorial project that has taught me things I never thought that I would have to know, like Rhode Island lead laws. But what you're seeing here is an enclosure that we had to build as part of this extraction in order to do that with the utmost level of safety, which we were committed to. We worked with Diane Rousseau, as your team did, as well as the late Mary Clerkin Higgins and her team on this extraction. This is them at the top of the church in July in 99-degree heat in Tyvek uniforms in a plastic enclosure to do this work. They would really ended up only working a couple hours a day because we had to break in between, but in order to do it safely and carefully. But the whole extraction of the window, for context, even with those conditions, took about 5 days. And I thought this is a fun video to show you. Glass is delicate, yes, but it also is meant to be handled by 2 people. Oh. Where's my mouse? Okay. And so here you can see the way that they did this. I mean, it was careful, but it was confident. It's, you remove those tie wires, you test it, like there's a little wiggle in there. But these panels really are meant to fit together and intended to be able to be extracted from their place. The next phase was, of course, thinking of bringing this to the Art Institute and understanding where this was going to be sited in the museum. So like the same conditions that we're all thinking about with giant windows. At the museum, there were very few places that this could have lived at all. And where we landed on was atop the Women's Board Grand Staircase at the Art Institute. For those of you who have been there, you kind of walk through those famous lions into the museum to this staircase, and you look up. It's a historic building that was constructed around the time of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Not only was this one of the only places that the window would fit, it also had meaning because of the context of this building, because this was the site of the first congregation of world religions as part of the fair. So again, thinking about transitioning the window from a religious context into a secular space, we're still able to really talk about that impact, particularly in its new place. And this had really a lot of meaning for the congregation as well. But the site posed challenges. For number one, it's a 4-foot brick wall where we knew that this needed to live. There was no going into the wall. And here we had to do a lot of digging into our institutional archives to understand the architecture and structurally what was possible. We also thought a lot about other examples of lighting within the museum and quickly realized we needed to invent a new system. We have a very famous set of panels at the Art Institute, the Chagall America windows. For context, these have a 6-foot cavity behind them and they're lit by fluorescent lights. And that just wasn't an option for the Hartwell Memorial window. You can see here a little bit more about the narrowness of this balcony where it was being installed with myself and one of my colleagues at left. And ultimately, mapping out where it was being sited also had to do with those structural beams. So there was a lot of considerations in landing exactly where it would fit. And then we had to turn to what it meant then to build a package that could sit proud of that brick wall for this massive window. And so here you are looking at the design results of something that was weeks of consultation between curators, conservators, structural engineers, lighting designers, and it's this kind of 4-part system of a steel structure that would hold everything, the lighting apparatus, the glass itself, and then its frame. Now, I don't have time today to dive into every aspect of this, but I think it's kind of interesting to see how this was constructed. So I'll show you a couple glimpses here. This is the construction of the steel structure that held all elements, which was done by Ravenswood Studios, which is a local partner that we found that did tremendous work on the project. In order to think about its frame and its surround, when you're taking something out of a building, you can't take that frame with you. And so we really had to think about what it meant to honor that part of its architectural setting, but adapt it for the museum. So we did a 3-dimensional scan of that frame and used that as the basis for the tracery. And here that tracery is being milled and designed. It ultimately was made out of foam. And I think that's an interesting part of the story here. The frame is not what's holding the glass up. It's that steel structure and then some aluminum mounts for the glass. And then we had determined the lighting apparatus. So again, knowing this had to be in essence like a 2-foot package, we needed lights that weren't going to emit heat. We also needed lights that were going to compete as best as they could with the sun. And so we landed with an LED system that really hangs behind it like a curtain. You can kind of see these. So very different than the lighting design that you've landed on, which I also think is fascinating. These are 2 really innovative approaches to how to approach this in new ways. Meanwhile, all of this work was underway, as was the assessment and conservation of the glass. So here you can see Diane Rousseau, who we contracted to come work at the Art Institute with our objects conservator Rachel Sabino and what we called our Tiffany Lab. You can see, again, some of these similar ways that it's just extraordinary to understand how these windows can be opened up and repaired. This is another example of a window that ended up being in tremendous condition. We really only opened up a fraction of the panels for any kind of glass repairs, which was extraordinary. But by way of that, the commitment that we were able to make as an institution of saying, what does it mean to bring a stained glass window like this into the museum? We can study, we can assess, we can maybe pull out information that wasn't known before. Tiffany Studios does not have one archive. You can't just go research exactly how it was made and who was involved. And so in many ways, the objects are what can speak to that. And so some of the discoveries that we made, because we were involved in both the extraction, the conservation, and the reinstallation, are things like finding evidence of cold painting inside layers of glass. I give you here the map. This is one of the upmost right tip-top corners of a 26-foot window that sat 25 feet off the ground. So 50 feet above where you're looking, they took the time to paint out inside of a panel to carry this tree line up to the top. The exactitude of the firm and their commitment to these aesthetics, I think, is extraordinary through this kind of discovery. Another panel at left is very revealing of what it means to have an extraordinary work like this made in New York and shipped all over the world. This glass is just being put on a train and taken to these places and installed. And there are decisions that are made along the way, depending on whether the glass makes it, the considerations once it's being installed in that site. And here we made this discovery of a really rough perimeter lead where replacement glass had been put in that didn't match any other part of the window. And because we were part of the extraction, we knew based on paint that carried from the window onto the architecture that it was a repair that had been made on site. So while I think there's still a lot more discovery to come from this, this is the kind of stuff that opens up the knowledge of the many hands that go into realizing these works around the world. I mentioned that it's not the frame that holds the glass in, it's aluminum mounts that are bespoke to each panel, and this is our mount maker, Andy, carving out some very intricate forms. And then all of the testing that went in to understanding how these various puzzle pieces were going to fit, and the kind of on-site work that we had to continue to do in iterative phases as we were working towards the installation as a whole. We never at any point got to lay out the whole window at the Art Institute. Once we deinstalled and brought it to the museum, it wasn't until the end that we saw it kind of come back together. And throughout this, it's very strange for me sometimes to give this talk because you'll see us all in masks. This is all happening during COVID. And one of the things that for me was really odd but moving is we ended up being a project that took place largely while the museum was closed. And we were able to, yes, take advantage of the space, but also really think about what it would mean to everyone to have this be present when we reopened. And that kind of came to a head where we found out that we were going to be able to reopen a few weeks earlier than we thought, which was wonderful for the world and for us, but we hadn't put the glass up yet. And so we had to erect this giant drive-in movie screen in the grand staircase, both for the safety of our employees as they were installing, but also to give some buffer and level of privacy for the work that was happening. But I love the image on the right because it really shows you how that was kind of limited. There was still this shadow game that people could come and watch while it was happening. But the image on the left really gives you a sense of the narrow confines that we were working in when we finally went to install the glass after the conservation had happened, after all of these kind of puzzle pieces were coming together. And here you can see our teams at work. Each panel of glass was mounted to those aluminum frames on site. And then it was offered up to this steel frame that had already had the lighting system put in place. But because of everything I've described to you, we were doing tests of this lighting in different parts of the museum where we could. We had to kind of pause at every step of the way to see how it was working. And so here's one moment where we really were saying to ourselves, the light just isn't penetrating in the way we need it to in some of the most opaque areas of the glass. And so we decided to pull out one of the diffusing layers because the glass was thick enough that you weren't just seeing the little diodes of the light, but that really helped with the light penetration. So we were kind of, stopping along the way, and you can see these various stages. This was the first day any of us had seen the window put back together again as a whole, fully lit. And we did kind of pull that curtain on a closed day and stand back and, really marvel at the window in its new setting, make those final tweaks, and know that we were ready to kind of frame this piece for a new audience. And then that was that last piece of the puzzle, was this kind of 3D milled foam. It's the most fun game of Tetris my coworker Chris has ever played, but it kind of slots in over the glass, harmonizing it with the space around. And this is an image of, before any of the didactic panels went in and before we kind of took those steps towards interpretation. But now you have this work that is at home in Chicago. And while I'm talking about what went into thinking about the care of this piece, the reinstallation, the interpretation of it, all of that now has led to what can be its future. Part of sharing this is continuing to learn with our visitors, with scholars, with our museum colleagues, to share what we learned and to understand how this can be adapted for other approaches to the installation of stained glass in various sites. And I also think what's incredible to look at it here and to think about it now, I mean, if anybody asks me, this window is not allowed to move ever again. It will live here forever. But what is really wonderful is that it can. We as a museum have been able to approach the glass and think about this object in ways that can be flexible into the future and very much be attuned to its care and safety and access that I think is a really wonderful thing. It's one of the aspects of it that I'm most proud of, is that this can like live beyond me and be reinterpreted by others. It's a window that is no longer fixed in its original location, but in spirit is now open to the world through these steps. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, I turned it off. Oh, good. Thank you so much, Liz. I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Jennifer Perry-Thalheimer. Jennifer Perry-Thalheimer is the Executive Director and Chief Curator at the Charles Hosmer Morse Museum of American Art in Winter Park, Florida. The Morse Museum is best known as home to the world's most comprehensive collection of materials owned, collected, and created by Louis C. Tiffany, but also has significant holdings in American art and design from the mid-19th century to the early 20th century. For over 25 years, Ms. Thalheimer has been interpreting the museum's collection while researching the life and art of Louis C. Tiffany. She lectures and writes on the artist in his studio and more broadly on American design. She has created over 50 exhibitions at the Morse Museum, including the 6,000 square foot edition Louis Comfort Tiffany's Laurelton Hall. Ms. Thalheimer, who grew up in Long Island near the site of Tiffany's estate, received her master's degree from the New York Parsons School of Design, Cooper Hewitt Graduate Program in the History of Decorative Arts. Ms. Thalheimer's ongoing project, the Louis Comfort Tiffany Chronology, is a living resource on the Morse Museum's website, which centralizes documented facts of Tiffany's life. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Perry-Thalheimer.
Thank you so much for having me. This is wonderful to come up to the nice, cool weather. I left 90 degrees and humidity. My hair is a little less frizzy, so I'm thrilled. I wanted to thank everybody here for having us. This is a wonderful exhibition of these windows, and what an incredible thing for your community to have access to these incredible panels and to be able to get so close up and not just see them, but really be able to experience them. The way that they have installed them is really special, so feel very proud of your community. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about, I guess I'm doing that, okay. So, the Morse Museum, has anybody been to Winter Park, to the Morse Museum? Okay, a handful of you, good. I recommend everybody visit because we are an incredibly special place, and that coming from somebody that came from New York and really understands what the collection is. I'm going to tell you a little bit ahead of time about the museum. So the reason that our collection is so important is that it's not just regular objects. These are actually objects that, for the most part, Tiffany either created himself or worked with others to create them for one of his two houses or for exhibition purposes. And on the left you see his New York mansion, and on the right is his country estate on Long Island. And so both of these places were filled with windows and beautiful objects that Tiffany really took personal care in choosing and exhibiting there. And Laurelton Hall specifically was his country estate, and it's what he built between 1902 and 1905. And you can see him on the left with his sisters in the gardens. It's where he felt most at home. He was in charge of the architecture, which was described as being like a railroad car going up a hill, but it was really its own kind of special thing. Tiffany did the landscaping, he did the architecture, but he also brought the objects inside. Now in 1918, it converted into he founded the Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation. And the idea behind that was to bring artists in who were young and trying to get a foothold into the art world. And so this would be their sort of a place to come, work out their ideas, be introduced to other artists of the time period, and to spend some time in the beauty, the collection that Tiffany had created. Now, the other part of this was that the estate was supposed to become a museum. So Tiffany started moving many of his objects that were created for the 72nd Street house, his New York house, and moving them to Laurelton Hall, and that this would become a museum that would endure forever. In technicality, he felt like today we should be going and visiting Laurelton Hall, but that was not to be. So many of these artists were incredibly well-known artists or became very well-known artists. Luigi Lucioni, Charles Hawthorne, they spent regular time here studying and being a part of this community. Now, one of the people most significant for Winter Park and the Morse Museum was Hugh McCain, and he was our first director. He was an art student who was working his way into art, had many opportunities, was studying at the Art Students League in New York City, and his father had entered him in to become a fellow at Laurelton Hall with Louis Comfort Tiffany. And you can actually see him on the right in this newspaper clipping from Laurelton Hall. And he was accepted and was able to spend 3 months there. And as a modern artist, these modern artists saw Tiffany as something, old-fashioned. And, while it was wonderful that they got this time, they got really spoiled living in this mansion. The other hand, they wanted to be doing something new and sort of forgetting tradition. And so it wasn't the artwork that really impressed Hugh McCain. It was the experience in being around Louis Comfort Tiffany that really made an impression on him. So fast forward over years and after the World War and after Louis, Tiffany had passed away in 1946, the foundation, Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation, decided that it was too much to maintain the building. And so they closed down the museum, sold off all of the artwork on the interior, and then offered the building up for sale as well. The building eventually sold for $10,000. And the things that were not worthy of being sold off in this sale, including the windows, were included in that $10,000. In 1957, the house burned down. Now, Hugh McCain had never, and this is Hugh McCain looking incredibly dapper on the scene of wreckage of a fire. He and his wife never intended on becoming Tiffany collectors, even though today they're known as some of the most famous Tiffany collectors that had been. It was only because of this fire and really the loss that he felt of this very personal place to him, and he gained so much respect for Louis Tiffany and this place and what had been gathered there, that they went and they said, we need to rescue everything. And so fortunately, that's how the Morse Museum came about. So I'm going to go through 4 windows in our collection just to give you sort of an idea of some of the challenges that go along with this. The great thing is that we know the history of many of our windows. They were incredibly personal works that were created and designed firsthand by Louis Tiffany, including this magnolia panel. And it's an incredible work of art, and it's not only the glass that's in it. It's colorless glass, so basically clear panes of glass that are behind it. And when you see in this photo, we have a kind of filter behind it. And so it looks like they're white pieces of glass, but it's actually colorless pieces of glass. But in the detailed picture on the right, you can see how textural the material is. And it always shocks me that you have something as hard as glass, and yet they take on these folds and undulation that are like, the little petals of nature, and something is soft and fluid that can blow around in the wind, but it's glass. And so this interpretation, you see the detail, and it's not only the glass, it's also the connecting pieces. You look at the leading that's in between it, and you can see these kind of lines within the leading. They seem like branches. So Tiffany was using a framework and the work that's needed to support the glasses together and also support the weight of the window, really putting it into the panels itself, building it into the design. And so this is one of the windows that's sort of a challenge. And so you can see on the left is it installed at the 72nd Street house, and there were many more panels. Only 3 of them survive now. And those are panels that were then brought over from 72nd Street when Tiffany was making it a museum and installing it at Laurelton Hall in the dining room. And you can see in both cases, he's using the clear, colorless panels, not putting anything behind them, but allowing you to see through them. So you're looking through the branches of nature itself. And in the case at 72nd Street, you're looking out the window onto the busy street in Manhattan. And at Laurelton Hall, you're actually looking between rooms. So we wanted to keep this concept together, and so we installed it in between 2 galleries at the museum. And you can see this is our Tiffany Life and Art exhibit, and this is looking straight on. But you also get to see the back of the window, which is something that's very unusual that you don't get to see at other museums. And so you can sit or participate on both sides and really get the feeling of what it was like. And looking through it, you're looking through it just the way that Tiffany had intended, that it is this colorless glass. It's not something that was a barrier between spaces, but something that kind of invited you to go through and be on the other side as well. Now, the second window that I wanted to point out is our Four Seasons panels. And this was best known for its exhibition at the 1900 World's Fair in Paris. And it was an entire window, and so you can see the panels that exist on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side are the panels as set into what the original grouping would have been. And so there's parts that were missing that had been removed. When Tiffany, so this is how it was exhibited at the Paris World's Fair, and you can see that there are 4 Seasons panels. There's an upper panel of an eagle and urns on the bottom, and then there's a framework between it. And the whole center section is just beautiful jewels, glass work. And so this is how it was exhibited there. But when he brought it to Laurelton Hall, so it was an exhibition window that he then lived with, he took them apart, and you can see them on the upper portion of the room separated. And so that's how we have it exhibited at the Morse Museum now. My feeling about this is I think that these are actually earlier windows that he actually put together in 1900 to exhibit, and that he felt very comfortable then taking them apart and exhibiting them at Laurelton Hall in a separated way. So these are calls that we would never make. We would never look at a whole window from 1900 and say, hey, let's take that apart and just make different framework for it. But Tiffany curated a good part of our collection, and so we're able to kind of take how he wanted them to be seen, and it's really wonderful because you can come face to face with these incredible works. Now, we've also exhibited them in different ways. So the Four Seasons are in our living room installation in the Laurelton Hall wing. We also have the framework, which we've exhibited, which we have in context as well. And this is the entry to Laurelton Hall. And if you notice at the back end behind the hanging shades, you can see some of the trim work. And I have a detail on the right. And if you see above the trim work up are the urns and the eagle. And so this is how we have it exhibited, these components at the museum, so that you get a feeling. This is as you're entering from the garden facade and coming into the main room. And so we've added these in. One interesting fact, though, on the upper part, the eagle window, if you'll notice, it's upside down at Laurelton Hall. We don't know why. And we thought about maybe hanging it that way in the museum, but then we figured we'd get a lot of questions and our answer would be, I don't know why. And so, we have actually shown the components together in the context of the 1900 exhibition, but once we built the wing for Laurelton Hall, we separated them the way that Tiffany had shown them there. This is from a 2002 installation before the Laurelton Hall galleries had been built. Now I want to turn to the next set of windows, which is the wisteria windows, which many of you may be familiar with. And these were originally created for the dining room at Laurelton Hall, and you can see that they're in this arched way and really kind of frame out, looking out into the garden and the daffodil terrace. And we had panels. Now, part of the story of this is when these pieces were being acquired, it was right after the fire that had occurred at Laurelton Hall in 1957. And basically a Margus clearing company came in, and they were a demolition company, and the insurance company had given them permission to get rid of everything, and so they were kind of selling it to the highest bidder. Well, Mr. McCain had acquired all of the windows, but he then decided, the company decided, we're going to hold on to one of these personally. We're just going to keep it. So the original setting of these windows, there's one that was held back. It's now in another collection. And so what do you do if you know that you don't have all of them? So this is how we've exhibited at the Morse Museum. It's an interpretation of the dining room gallery, the dining room space at Laurelton Hall, and we put them in a straight line, hoping that one day one would turn up and we would be able to then kind of angle them the way they were at Laurelton Hall and fit in the extra panel. So send us good vibes that we'll eventually get that extra panel. And then I want to talk about an interesting thing about the museum is we have, from the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893, we have a window that was exhibited at the fair, and we have a lot of background material for it. So not only do we know about the window and what it was created for, ultimately where it went, the different buildings and the purpose for it, but we also have a lot of objects that surround it, having to do with its design. And we have photographs. We have the original design that Tiffany conceived of on board, and we have a mock-up that he actually put together. How do we actually strength-wise support the window? So we have an example of that. And then this is a very personal commission, and the face of Joseph of Arimathea was based upon Tiffany's father, Charles Tiffany, who started Tiffany and Company, who also shared his space at the World's Columbian Exposition, so Louis Tiffany could become well known. And so very important for him to convey that feeling of his father. And this is a really incredible panel because it's plated. There are layers of glass in it that the first layer has what appears to be the hair. Then set back is another one that gives you the bridge of the nose. Another one kind of sets back the cheeks. And what's incredible about it is that if you walk around it and you move with it, it gives you a holographic feeling to this face. So it really becomes lifelike, and you're really drawn into that part of the window. So each one of these components gives you a little bit better understanding of all of the other ones. And so at the museum, we have a display that you can walk through and actually see how these things come about and understand more about the window. Now the final piece that I have, we actually have 150 windows in our collection, and they span from about 1500 until about 1940. But the majority of them, I'd say like 98% of them, are really within 1870s until about 1920s. And so, but they're not all Tiffany. And so this is a great example of a Lamb Studios window. Another manufacturer, actually the longest running glass house in the country, still manufacturing pieces. But this was a competitor of Tiffany's, and probably at a slightly lower price point, but incredible work that they did, especially for commissions for going into world's exhibitions. And this window, the arts window, was created for women's buildings, and so it really features women's talents in needlepoint and literature and writing and painting, and so it had real importance. This was actually one of the pieces that was in their own showroom, created specifically for exhibitions, and it was shown in Tennessee in a number of exhibitions around the world, and had great prominence in these places. And so, and this is a very large window, so we had to figure out how to really exhibit this window. Now, some of the quirky things about the Morse Museum, at one point, Hugh McCain wanted people to really experience the artwork, and knew that not everybody was willing to come into a museum or feel a part of it, but he wanted them to experience the artwork. And so at a restaurant in Winter Park for a time, they installed these windows. And so you could go and have dinner and live amongst these artworks. And here's Hugh McCain with another man enjoying the arts window in the background. Needless to say, when it came back to the museum in, I think, 1995, it needed a lot of cleaning and coffee grounds removed and things like that. But it's, you can see here, it's really in 7 pieces, and they're very large pieces and very heavy. Whereas Tiffany used a lot more plating and full, larger pieces of glass, Lamb Studios used a lot more leading, and so they're a little bit more flexible and a different way of handling. Every maker of glass is going to have a different handling technique. And so this is how we installed it at the Morse Museum. And you can see some of the variety of glass that we exhibit. So thank you so much for having us this morning.